Disney Marvel's Loki, Episode 5. This was entitled Journey into Mystery, and of course, any episode that's named after me, see, Journey into Mystery, J-I-M, Jim. In any case, I think it's a nod to both Thor and Loki because the first comic appearance of Thor, if I'm not mistaken, was in a Journey into Mystery comic series, which then later he got his own title, but Loki was in there as well. So I think it's kind of a nod to the Marvel Comics. And this was an interesting episode. It had some slow parts, but again, it won me over because of Hiddleston and Owen Wilson.
Yes, I really liked this episode. I liked the last episode. I think that it was very interesting to see it progress into this episode. In some ways, I think this episode had a little bit more action, but in other ways, I think it had less action. So it was interesting.
I agree. Now, we find out that when variants are pruned, they're not really killed, at least right away. They go to a void, which is a point at the end of time where all the variants go. And there's a creature there called the Goliath, which is this giant smoke, lion, dragon kind of creature, which basically consumes them, unless they can get away. And what we find in the void are a lot of variant Lokis, because Lokis are clever and lucky, and they seem to be able to get away. So we get the payoff from last week's mid-credits scene, where we see the Richard E. Grant character of classic Loki. There's a kid Loki. There's a boastful Loki, and there's even an alligator Loki. And then there turns out to be many more Lokis at some point, because Lokis are able to avoid being consumed. So that's interesting. Also, I've grown to like Sylvie quite a bit.
Yes.
And we get a nice payoff at the TVA between her and Renslayer. Instead of just killing Renslayer in the last episode, like I'm sure she wanted to, because I'm sure she wanted vengeance, her ultimate goal is to get to whoever is controlling the timeline. So she kept Renslayer alive, and they have this kind of uneasy truce at the beginning where they're both trying to get information. And Renslayer really kind of proves to be as despicable as I thought she was all along, but even more so, I think.
Yes. I actually did like Renslayer as a villainous character. I thought she was very mysterious this entire time. I really didn't expect anything like that out of her. But I agree with you as well with Sylvie. When we first met Sylvie, I wasn't really that excited to meet her because that episode I didn't really think it was that great of an episode because we were meeting her so much and we were learning so much about her. But now I do really like her.
And we also find out that Hunter B-15 is still alive. We weren't sure. I kind of suspected she was. She has a nice conversation with Renslayer here. It really kind of pays off because Renslayer wants to find out who's controlling all this. But B-15 basically tells her, Sylvia will be the one that finds out because you just want to know. Sylvie needs to know. That was a nice moment. So we get into this void and we see some, you pointed out a couple Easter eggs. We saw some Easter eggs there.
Yes. Thor's hammer was there. And I was wondering because it looks like the boastful Loki has his hammer.
He has a version of Thor's hammer because he's the most like Thor of all the Loki characters. But when they're kind of panning to the underground layer that is Kid Loki or King Loki's location, we see the hammer. You spotted it. I wasn't really paying attention. And you spotted it and we rewound and sure enough it was there. And we see that. Also, there, it looks like there was some remnants of Thanos' copter on the planet. In any case, we get this great comedic situation with all these Lokis. The 4 that we saw at the end of the last episode, and then eventually all the other ones that come in. And they're all fighting with one another because they've all been working behind each other's back to take power. Ultimately, our Loki, Tom Hiddleston, decides that he's going to confront the creature, the Goliath creature. and see if he can get past it. And of course, Richard E. Grant thinks that's funny, as does Kid Loki, but they go with him, as does Alligator Loki, which is kind of funny. Meanwhile, in a great scene, when Sylvie prunes herself to get to the void, and when she gets there, the creature is about to consume her, and she's rescued by a pizza delivery vehicle driven by Mobius, which was great. I thought that was nice. It was funny. I was glad to see he was still alive. I like how all this played out. I like how he's going to go back, because Sylvie stole the Tempad from Renslayer, and Mobius takes the Tempad, and he's going back to burn down the TVA, and I'm sure Hunter B-15 is going to help him when he gets there. That would be my guess. And we get some nice moments at the end of this episode with Sylvie, our Tom Hiddleston Loki, and Richard E. Grant's classic Loki. Actually, really, he has a very heroic part to play at the end of this episode.
Yes, I was excited to see Mobius. I thought in the last episode, with the post-credit scene, we would see Mobius instead of the 4 Lokis, but we saw the 4 Lokis, which had more questions for me. But in this episode, I'm glad that they brought back Mobius, because I was scared that Loki wouldn't meet Mobius.
I agree. Now, like I said, some of it played a little slow for me, and I was sort of tuning out a little bit here and there. But then again, Hiddleston and Wilson had this great moment. Mobius sticks his hand out to shake Loki's hand, because he's definitely on Loki's side now, knowing what the TVA is. And Loki, Tom Hiddleston, just looks at him, and he gives him this huge hug. And it's this great moment, because it's so genuine and so real. Even you turned to me, and I think you verbally awed when he did that. And then, of course, Owen Wilson had a great comedic line. He said to Sylvia, "You're still my favorite." You know, so it was it was a very poignant moment. It still had humor, but everything that's good about this series stems from those characters: Loki, Mobius, Sylvie, and classic Loki after this episode. Certainly, I thought was very powerful.
Yes, I did awe, because I thought it was very interesting how, I don't remember if it was Loki calling Mobius his buddy or Mobius calling Loki his buddy, but they said they were buddies, and I thought that was good, because it's like they finally trust each other for sure. And
you finally see Loki genuinely invest in someone. I think he also really cares for Sylvie, but for him to care for Mobius that way, I think, you know, he finally dropped his guard. For real this time. I don't think there was any manipulation involved in it. I think it was the real deal. Now, they've all basically theorized, and I think correctly so, that the Alioth is like a guard dog. Basically preventing them from getting further to find out who's really behind all this and pulling the strings. Most people feel it's King the Conqueror, who is a big character in the comic books, who I believe even dated Renslayer, if I'm not mistaken. But they feel that's who we're going to find back here, and it's going to be a big-time villain moving forward in the Marvel Universe, if that's the case. So it's very interesting. I think the last episode is set up very well to be a crowd pleaser here, because you have Mobius going back to TVA. Hunter B-15 is still around back there, on his side most likely. Renslayer would provide the enemy there. And you have Loki and Sylvie going to confront whoever this is that's behind the TVA and the Timekeepers and everything else, manipulating the sacred timeline, who we think may be King the Conqueror. Hopefully this won't be one of these things where the theories of the fans are better than the payoff we actually get in the series. But I think this is setting up, you know, my expectations haven't been so high for this because it's been slower moving, but I've been really impressed with the characters and how much the characters have made me feel for them. So I like that about it.
Yes, I agree. I'm very excited to see the next episode and what's going to happen. I think that there have been episodes where I haven't liked it so much and I wasn't really excited for the next episode, but this episode, definitely, I'm excited.
I'll say this. I think stretching this out over 6 episodes made it slower paced at points, and it felt like they were giving us filler. It was valuable filler because, again, I cared about Sylvie after really getting to know her. So in the last episode, I cared what happened to her much more because of the previous episode.
Right.
But that said, if you took what we've seen so far in these 5 episodes and potentially what we're going to see in the 6th episode, this would have made a really, really effective 2 hour and 15-minute film. So I would have liked to have seen this. I would like to see an edited down version, tighter version of this as a film. I think it would have been more fast-paced and more action. But there's nothing wrong with getting to know these characters. And we're getting set up for the future with Loki, potentially Sylvie, Mobius, all these different characters, possibly in movies moving forward. For me, this episode was one to see.
One to see here, too.
We'll see what happens next week. Maybe we'll get Loki. See what I did there? Happy go Loki? No? No? I'm a little tired today. I'm feeling kind of Loki. What did I do? Episode 6, next week. See what I did there?
Oh, Daddy.